A planter's proud daughter stands on courthouse steps, laughing loud enough for all to hear. "Too black for me," she says, brushing past a small girl's offered help. But when debt collectors ride into town with legal papers and iron chains, everything changes. The little girl knows secrets hidden in hymn verses, routes and crossings coded in children's lullabies. Her 7-year-old brother carries a lantern through storm and flood, leading armed men into the darkness. In a doctor's ledger, cramped Latin words tell of switched infants and inheritance lies. Forged papers bear the wrong color wax. Thunder rolls. Horses splash through rising water. A boy stands alone on storm-loosened planks, facing men twice his size with nothing but courage and a flickering flame. When the morning comes and the truth is spoken aloud in the courthouse square, will a proud woman's confession be enough to break the chains of her own making, or will the bounty hungers claim them all? The kitchen held its morning hush. Steam rose from the cast-iron pot, and ash settled soft on the hearthstones. Mariah moved quiet between the benches, her bare feet sure on the worn pine boards. She pulled a length of blue ribbon from her apron pocket, silk, maybe once belonging to some lady's bonnet, and knelt beside her brother. "Hold still, Joe." Her voice was steady, like always. She wound the ribbon twice around Josiah's thin wrist and tied it snug, blue like the clerk's good wax. Josiah, 7 and quick as a sparrow, twisted to see. "Why the ribbon, sis?" "So I can find you in the smoke and steam." She tested the knot. It would hold, but not too tight. "Kitchen gets thick come afternoon." Aunt Dinah, stirring cornmeal at the big stove, glanced over. The older woman's hands never stopped their work, but her eyes took measure. "That child's got a way about her, tying and timing." Mariah began to hum. The tune came from somewhere deep, a lullaby their mother used to sing before the fever took her last winter. The notes matched the kettle's hiss and the soft puff of the bellows. Outside, the yard dogs started their morning bark, but when Mariah's voice found its true pitch, they quieted. "Listen to that," Dinah said, shaking her head with wonder. "Girl's pitch sets a room right." The hymn had words, but Mariah never sang them out loud. Something about 2 poles and a cypress knee, a lantern low. It stuck in her bones like hunger, but she didn't know why. She just hummed and worked, and the kitchen settled into its proper rhythm. Josiah pulled at the ribbon. "It's pretty, sis. Pretty and practical." Mariah stood and smoothed her apron. "Come on, we've got errands." They stepped into the morning light. The Mayhew place spread before them. Big house gleaming white, quarters stretching toward the river, fields running to the tree line. Fog hung low over the water, and the air tasted of wet earth and wood smoke. At the courthouse steps, the town was stirring. Wagons creaked past, wheels grinding on the packed dirt. Women in calico dresses climbed the stone steps with purpose, and men in dark coats clustered near the posted notices. Mariah's eyes caught on a fresh paper tacked to the courthouse door. The words were too far to read, but something about it made her stomach tighten. She guided Josiah closer. "Debt review," she read under her breath. "Estate of Thomas Mayhew." Josiah tugged the ribbon. "What's it mean?" Before Mariah could answer, voices rose from the probate office window. She pulled her brother into the shadow of the steps and listened. "Wrong-colored wax on the filing," she heard. A man's voice, worried. "Brown instead of red. Pike knows better." Silas Pike, their overseer. Mariah's chest went cold. Footsteps rang on the courthouse stones. Eliza Mayhew descended, her green silk dress rustling, her bonnet tilted just so. 20 years old and beautiful in the way that made men stumble over their words. She carried herself like she owned the very air. Mariah stepped forward. "Miss Eliza, ma'am." Eliza paused, her hand on the iron rail. "What is it?" "There's talk up there." Mariah nodded toward the window. "About wrong-colored wax." The clerk's worried. "Worried about what?" Mariah pulled the blue ribbon from Josiah's wrist, gently so the boy barely felt it. She held it up. "This is blue like the true red seal, but muddy brown. That's not right for legal papers." Eliza looked at the ribbon, then at Mariah. Her laugh came sharp and bright, carrying across the courthouse yard. Heads turned. Neighbors stopped their conversations. "Too black for me," Eliza said, her voice pitched so all could hear. She brushed past, silk whispering against stone. "I don't take counsel from the quarters." The words hung in the morning air like smoke. Mariah's hand closed around the ribbon. Josiah's eyes went wide, then narrow. The watching faces showed everything from amusement to pity to shame. Mariah said nothing. She retied the ribbon on Josiah's wrist with steady fingers, though her face burned. Behind them, A rider in a worn coat hammered an addendum to the posted notice. Bounty authority extended through the week. Back at the big house, Silas Pike waited in the front parlor. He was a lean man with careful hands and eyes that never quite met yours straight on. He held a folded paper, and his smile was too wide. "Miraculous thing, Miss Eliza," he said. "Found these in the old files. Your daddy must have set them aside and forgotten." Thomas Mayhew sat heavy in his chair, looking older than his 55 years. The debts had carved lines around his eyes, and his hands shook when he thought nobody was watching. "What papers?" Eliza took off her gloves, still flushed from the courthouse. "Manumission for Ruth, Mariah's mother, signed and sealed proper." Silas unfolded the document with a flourish. "Means the girl's freeborn. Makes things simpler." Mariah, standing quiet by the door with a water pitcher, felt her heart jump. She moved closer, pretending to dust the side table, and studied the paper over Silas's shoulder. The handwriting looked right. The signature seemed true, but the seal, the wax was brown where it should be red, and the serif on the M in Mayhew sat crooked, like a bird with a broken wing. "Forgery," she whispered, so soft only Josiah could hear. Eliza reached for the papers, but hesitated. "If Ruth was freed, then the girl's not property," Silas said, smooth as butter. "No complications with the debt men, clean business." Thomas Mayhew rubbed his temples. "The bounty liens won't touch her if she's freeborn. Smart planning your daddy had." Mariah watched Eliza's face. Doubt flickered there, quick as candlelight. The young woman looked toward Mariah, then away. "I suppose," Eliza began. "Not today," Mariah said, clear enough for all to hear. The room went still. Silas turned, his smile slipping. "What did you say, girl?" Mariah stepped forward. "The wax is wrong, Miss Eliza. Brown instead of red. And the letter forms don't match the real seal." "She doesn't know what she's talking about," Silas said quick. "I know true from false." Mariah met Eliza's eyes. Like blue from brown, like help from harm. Eliza stared at her. The morning's insult hung between them, heavy as storm clouds. Then Eliza took the papers from Silas and folded them careful. "We'll consider this later," she said. "When father is feeling better." Silas's jaw tightened. "Miss Eliza, the debt meant later." When Silas left, Mariah slipped the forged papers from the side table and tucked them into the stitched margin of her hymnal. The old book had loose binding, and somebody long ago had sewn a hidden pocket in the back cover. "Not today," she whispered again, fingers tracing the blue ribbon on Josiah's wrist. The church basement smelled of candle wax and old wood. Aunt Dinah knelt by a small fire, steaming horehound and willow bark in an iron pot. The herbs filled the air with their green, bitter scent. Mariah sat on a crate, matching her humming to the kettle's rhythm. The tune came perfect every time. 2 poles, 1 cypress knee, lantern low. "That child's ear can time a journey," Dinah said, stirring with a worn spoon. Her mother had it too. Reverend Abram Cole looked up from his ledgers. He was a tall man with gentle hands and a voice that could fill the church or quiet a frightened child. "The lullaby's old, isn't it?" Dinah nodded. "Older than most, remember. Root songs," the preacher said quiet, "marked the safe crossings back when such things mattered more." Mariah stopped humming. "What kind of crossings?" "Ferry poles, cypress knees, places to go when trouble came." He closed his ledger with a soft thump. "Your mama knew the true verses, and you know them too." The preacher's smile was sad and kind. "Some, there's a blessing I keep record of, from years back. Porch blessing for a child born. Complicated." Dinah pressed a sprig of horehound into Mariah's palm. The leaves were rough and smelled of medicine and hope. "For fever," she said, "and for fear." Mariah closed her fingers around the herbs. "Will you teach me the blessing, Reverend?" "When the time comes." He touched a leather trunk beside his desk. "When it's needed." Outside, thunder rumbled low. The afternoon was turning dark, and rain tapped on the church windows like searching fingers. Dr. Lucian Parrish kept his back room neat as a pin. Glass jars lined the shelves, filled with roots and powders and things that glowed strange in the lamplight. He sat hunched over a wide ledger, writing in Latin with a careful quill. Mariah swept the floor quiet, but her eyes were on the book. The doctor's handwriting was cramped but clear. Most of the words she couldn't read, but some jumped out. "Infans commutatus," switched infant. She moved closer, pretending to dust the lamp. The entry was dated 18 years back, and it mentioned the Mayhew place. A birth, a blessing, and something about inheritance complications. "Curious child?" Dr. Parrish said without looking up. Maria started. "Sorry, sir. No need. Curiosity keeps the mind sharp." He dipped his quill. "That book there holds more stories than the Bible." "What kind of stories?" "Births and deaths, sickness and healing. Sometimes they're the same thing." He wrote another line, then paused. "Sometimes a child born into trouble gets a porch blessing to set things right. Old custom. Like for inheritance?" The doctor's pen stopped. He looked at Maria with new interest. "What do you know about inheritance, child?" "Nothing, sir. Just wondering." He closed the ledger gentle. "Wondering's a good start. Knowledge comes after." Maria finished her sweeping and left, but her mind kept turning over the Latin words. Switched infant, porch blessing, inheritance complications. The pieces were there, scattered like leaves before a storm. She just had to gather them before the wind blew too hard. Storm clouds boiled up from the south, black and heavy with rain. At the courthouse, men nailed fresh notices to the door, while women gathered children close and hurried for cover. Maria and Josiah reached the square just as the first fat drops began to fall. The crowd around the courthouse was larger now, and their voices carried worry. "Bounty authority," someone read aloud. "Movable property to be seized for debt satisfaction. People included," another voice added, grim. Maria felt Josiah's hand slip into hers. The blue ribbon on his wrist was dark with rain, but it held firm. Eliza Mayhew stood on the courthouse steps, her face pale but proud. When she saw the gathering crowd, she lifted her chin and spoke clear. "The debts will be satisfied," she said. "My father's estate is sound." But the words rang hollow against the storm. Rain drummed harder on the courthouse roof, and the watching faces showed doubt. Old Mrs. Patterson, who ran the dry goods store, stepped forward. "What about this morning, child? When you said that girl was too black for your counsel?" Eliza's cheeks colored. "I spoke quickly or truly." The old woman's eyes were sharp. "Seems to me that child was trying to help." The crowd murmured agreement. Maria felt their eyes turn toward her, some kind, some curious, some still showing the morning's amusement. But underneath it all was something new, expectation. The first riders appeared at the edge of the square, 3 men in dark coats, their horses stepping careful on the wet stones. Bounty men, debt collectors. The kind who came when words and papers weren't enough. Eliza saw them too. Her proud stance wavered just for a moment before she caught herself. "There will be no trouble here," she said, but her voice was smaller now. The lead rider tipped his hat. "Ma'am, we're here on legal business." "What business?" "Debt collection. Got authority to seize movable property pending resolution." His eyes swept the crowd, stopping on Maria and Josiah. All of it. The title line hung over them all now, sharp as a blade. "Too black for me." But the morning's insult had become something else, a challenge thrown down in public, witnessed by neighbors who would remember every word. Maria's eyes did not harden. They stayed steady and clear like her mother's had been. She pulled Josiah closer and whispered in his ear, "Time to learn the true verses, little brother." The storm was coming, and more than rain would fall before it passed. Thunder rolled closer. In the church basement, Reverend Cole opened his ledger trunk with careful hands. The leather was old and soft, and the brass hinges sang a quiet note when they moved. "Wrote songs," he said, pulling out a slim book bound in brown cloth. "Used to mark the safe paths when folks needed to travel sudden-like." Maria sat beside him, Josiah close at her elbow. The basement was warm and dry, but outside the storm was building. "Your mama sang the lullaby different than most." The preacher's finger traced lines of faded ink. She knew the counter verses. "What do they do?" "Turn the route around. What leads one way can lead another, if you know the proper tune." He hummed a few bars. The melody was familiar, but the rhythm pulled strange. "2 poles, 1 cypress knee, lantern low, that's the true crossing. But sing it backwards and you send someone the wrong way." Josiah piped up. "Like a trick, like protection," Reverend Cole said gentle. "Sometimes the best help is misdirection." Aunt Dinah stirred her pot and nodded. "Child's got the ear for it. Perfect pitch runs in the blood." Maria studied the hymnal's pages. The notes looked simple enough, but she could feel the weight of them. Music that did more than soothe. Music that guided and guarded. "Teach me," she said. Dr. Parrish's back room was darker in the stormlight. Rain drummed on the windows, and the lamp flame wavered with each thunderclap. Maria cleaned the shelves while the doctor worked, but her eyes kept drifting to the closed ledger. When Dr. Parrish stepped out to tend a patient, she opened the book quick and quiet. Page 214. The entry she'd seen before, but now she read closer. "Infans commutatus." switched infant. A child born to scandal, blessed on the porch to legitimize the inheritance. The Mayhew name written clear, and a date from 18 years past. But there was more. A note in the margin, cramped and hurried. S. Pike, double debt recorded. Separate accounts to obscure estate value. Silas Pike. The overseer was skimming, running a scheme to make the debts look bigger than they were. The bounty men would seize property worth twice the actual debt, and Pike would pocket the difference. Maria memorized every word, then closed the book careful. When Dr. Parrish returned, she was back to dusting, calm as still water. "Storm's getting worse," he said, shaking rain from his coat. "Yes, sir, but storms pass." He looked at her sharp. "Wise words from a young person. My mama used to say it. Dark comes, but dawn follows sure." Dr. Parrish nodded slow. "Your mama was a good woman. Shame about the fever. She taught me what she could before she passed. Said knowledge was the one thing nobody could take. Smart woman." The doctor opened his ledger and dipped his quill. Knowledge and courage together, that's a powerful combination. Maria swept the last corner and gathered her cleaning rags. "Yes, sir, I believe it is." The plan came together in the church basement while the storm raged overhead. Maria spread the pieces out like puzzle fragments, the forged papers, the ledger knowledge, the hymn's true meaning. "Two routes," she explained to Josiah, tracing patterns on the dusty floor. "The true crossing and the false one. You'll take the false route. Lead the bounty men toward the bridge while I get Miss Eliza to safety." Josiah's eyes were bright with excitement and fear. "What if they catch me?" "They won't. You'll have the lantern and you know the counter-verses now. Sing them loud and clear, and they'll follow you right into the flood." Aunt Dinah looked worried. "Child, that bridge is storm-weakened. Dangerous for anybody. That's why it's perfect." Maria touched the blue ribbon on Josiah's wrist. "You don't have to cross it, Joe. Just lead them close enough to see it's not safe. Then you slip away while they're figuring that out." Reverend Cole closed his hymnal. "The Quaker family, the Quimbys, they'll have a wagon at the North Landing. If you can get Miss Eliza there." "We can." Maria stood and brushed dust from her apron. "But first, I need to show her the truth. About the papers, about the ledger, about why this all started. And if she won't listen." Maria thought of the morning's insult, the laughter that carried across the courthouse yard. Then she thought of the fear in Eliza's eyes when the bounty men arrived. She'll listen. Pride's a luxury she can't afford anymore. The big house felt different in the stormlight. Shadows moved strange in the corners, and every creak of the floorboards sounded like footsteps. Maria found Eliza in the front parlor, staring out at the rain. "Miss Eliza?" Eliza turned. Her face was pale, and her hands shook slight when she reached for her teacup. "What is it, Maria?" The use of her name was new. No more girl or silent dismissal. The bounty men's arrival had changed something. "I need to show you something, ma'am." Maria pulled the hymnal from her apron. "About those papers Mr. Pike found. The manumission, the forgery." Maria opened the book to the stitched margin and pulled out the false documents. "Look at the wax, Miss Eliza. Look close." Eliza took the papers and moved closer to the lamp. In the yellow light, the brown wax looked muddy and wrong. The seal was blurred and the letter forms sat crooked. "I don't understand. Mr. Pike made these to sell me off ledger before the debt men could claim me legal. He'd pocket the money and tell everyone I ran off." Eliza's breath caught. That's theft." "Yes, ma'am, but there's more." Maria sat careful on the edge of a chair. "I seen a ledger at the doctor's place, page 214. It talks about switched infants and double debt schemes. What does that mean?" Maria chose her words careful. "Means your inheritance is more secure than anybody's saying, and Mr. Pike's been making the debts look bigger than they are." Eliza set the papers down with trembling fingers. "How do you know all this?" "Because I listen, because I watch, because when you're small and dark and quiet, folks forget you're there." Maria met Eliza's eyes. "Because this morning you said I was too black for your counsel, but I'm all the help you've got left." The words hung between them like a bridge. Eliza could cross it or burn it, but she couldn't pretend it wasn't there. Thunder cracked overhead. Rain lashed the windows. Somewhere in the distance, dogs began to howl. "They're coming," Eliza whispered. "Yes, ma'am, but we're ready." Maria stood and retied the hymnal's stitched margin, hiding the forged papers safe inside. "Trust me, Miss Eliza. One more time. Trust that sometimes help comes in colors you don't expect." In the church basement among quilts and ledgers, they waited. The storm raged outside, but the thick stone walls kept out the worst of it. Aunt Dinah had prepared bread and small beer. Reverend Cole tended the fire. The space felt almost peaceful. Eliza sat on a crate beside Mariah, sharing the simple meal. The fever that had been building all day was settling in her cheeks and temples, but Mariah's herb tea helped. "Breathe slow," Mariah coached, timing her own breath to show the way. In through the nose, out through the mouth, like the kettle's rhythm. Eliza followed the pattern. Her breathing steadied, and the fever flush faded slight. "Where did you learn that?" "Aunt Dinah. She births babies and tends the sick. Says breathing right can heal most anything." They sat quiet for a while, listening to the storm. The world outside was wild, but here in the basement, surrounded by quilts and hymns and the smell of herb tea, everything felt safe. "I'm sorry," Eliza said sudden. "Ma'am, this morning, what I said, it was wrong." Mariah nodded. "Yes, ma'am, it was. I was frightened. Father's debts, the inheritance questions. I felt like everyone was watching, waiting for me to fail." Eliza's voice was small. "So I pushed you away, made myself feel bigger by making you feel smaller. Fear does that sometimes. It's no excuse." "No, ma'am, it's not. But it's a reason, and reasons can change." Mariah pulled the blue ribbon from her pocket and held it up to the lamplight. "This morning I offered you help, and you said I was too black. Tonight I'm offering again." Eliza looked at the ribbon, silk and simple and true blue. "What kind of help?" "The kind that might save us both." Footsteps echoed overhead, heavy boots on the church floor, men's voices, low and urgent. Aunt Dinah blew out the lamp. In the sudden darkness, Mariah began to hum. The lullaby filled the basement, soft and steady. 2 poles, 1 cypress knee, lantern low. But this time she sang it backwards, the counterverse that led the wrong way. Above them, the footsteps paused, then moved toward the front door. "They're leaving," Eliza whispered. "For now." Mariah's voice was calm in the dark. "But they'll be back. That's why we're going to move first." The fever piece was over. The real work was about to begin. Silas Pike's face was hard in the lamplight. He stood in the church doorway with 2 bounty men behind him, their coats dripping rain onto the worn floorboards. "Evening, Reverend," Silas said, but his voice held no courtesy. "Looking for some missing property?" Reverend Cole stepped between Pike and the basement door. "What property might that be?" 2 children, girl and boy, belonged to the Mayhew estate. One of the bounty men, a thick-set man with careful eyes, held up a legal paper. "Got authority to collect all movable property pending debt resolution." "Children are not property, sir. They are when they're bound." Silas's smile was thin. "Girl's got papers saying she's freeborn, but those papers ain't filed proper yet. Until they are, she belongs to the estate." In the basement, Mariah heard every word. She touched Eliza's hand in the darkness. "Stay quiet. Stay still." Then she slipped toward the back corner, where a root cellar door led to the churchyard. "Bring them up, Reverend," Silas called. "No point hiding what don't belong to you. I've seen no children here tonight." The thick bounty man stepped forward. "Then you won't mind if we look around." Their boots thudded on the church floor. Mariah heard them moving toward the basement steps. Time was running short. She found Josiah in the dark and pressed the blue ribbon into his palm. "Remember the counter-verses?" "Yes. Sing them true. Lead them to the old bridge, but don't cross it yourself. The storms made it dangerous." "What about you and Miss Eliza?" "We'll take the real route. Cypress Knee to Ferry Pole, then north to the Quimby place." She squeezed his shoulder. "Can you do this, Joe?" His voice was small but steady. "I can do it." The basement door creaked open. Lamplight spilled down the steps. Mariah pushed Josiah toward the root cellar. "Go. Now." He slipped through the narrow door like smoke. Mariah heard his bare feet on the wet grass, moving quick toward the river. "Nobody down here," Silas called up the steps. But they were here. Bread still warm. Mariah took Eliza's hand. "This way. Quiet as you can." They crept to the root cellar door. Outside, rain fell steady but not hard. The worst of the storm had passed, leaving the air clean and electric. "I can't see anything," Eliza whispered. "Follow my voice. Trust your feet." Mariah guided her through the dark churchyard, past the leaning headstones and the old oak tree. "Step where I step." Behind them, shouts echoed from the church. The bounty men had found the root cellar door. In minutes, they'd be in pursuit. Josiah ran through the rain with the lantern held high. The flame guttered in the wind, but it held. He'd trimmed the wick careful, like Mariah taught him, and filled it with good oil. The hymn rose from his chest as he ran. Not the lullaby his sister hummed in the kitchen, but the counter-verses Reverend Cole had taught them. The melody was the same, But the rhythm pulled different. Instead of leading to safety, it led to confusion. 2 poles, 1 cypress knee, lantern high, not low, turn left at the lightning-struck pine, not right. He heard the bounty men behind him, their horses splashing through puddles, and their voices calling directions. The lantern made him easy to follow, which was the point. There, see the light? Boy's heading for the river. Smart, try to cross before we catch him. Josiah smiled in the darkness. They thought they were hunting him. They didn't know he was leading them. The old bridge came into view through the rain. It had stood for 20 years, but the storm had loosened the pilings. Water rushed high and angry underneath, carrying branches and debris. The planks sagged in the middle, and the whole structure groaned with each gust of wind. Josiah stopped at the bridge's edge and raised the lantern. The light danced on the dark water below. "Got him cornered," one of the bounty men called. "Careful," said another. "Bridge don't look stable." Josiah began to sing, loud enough for them to hear. The counter-verse melody carried clear through the rain, promising safe passage and dry ground on the other side. The men urged their horses forward. The first rider stepped onto the bridge, testing the planks. They seemed solid enough. Josiah backed away, still singing, still holding the lantern high. The men followed, drawn by the light and the promise of capture. Halfway across, the bridge began to shake. "Whoa," the lead rider called, pulling his horse up short. "This thing's coming apart." But it was too late. The storm-weakened pilings gave way with a groan of splitting wood. The bridge tilted, spilling men and horses into the swollen river. None drowned. The water was deep, but not deadly. But their lanterns were lost, their papers soaked, and their horses scattered. In the chaos and darkness, they couldn't tell which way the shore lay. Josiah slipped away through the reeds, his own lantern dark now. He'd done what Mariah asked. The bounty men were safe but thoroughly confused, left to sort out their troubles while dawn was still hours away. The blue ribbon on his wrist had come loose in the rain, but he caught it before it floated away. Mariah would want it back. The cypress knee rose from the water like a bent prayer. Mariah led Eliza through the marsh grass, their feet squelching in the soft mud. The fever was building in Eliza again, and her breathing came short. "I can't," Eliza whispered, sinking to her knees in the wet grass. Too tired, too sick. Mariah knelt beside her. The fever was worse now, bringing with it the kind of exhaustion that settled in the bones. In the darkness, she could smell the sickness on Eliza's skin, sharp and wrong. "Listen to me, Miss Eliza. Remember what we practiced in the church basement. Breathe with me, in through the nose. I can't think straight. You don't have to think. Just breathe." Mariah matched her breathing to Eliza's, slow and steady. "Aunt Dinah taught me this. Sometimes when the fever comes, you got to trick your body into remembering how to be well." They breathed together in the darkness. Gradually, Eliza's pulse steadied. The fever flush faded slight. "Better?" "A little." Eliza struggled to stand. "How much further?" "Not far. The ferry pole's just ahead, then it's a straight path to the Quimby place." They moved careful through the marsh. Water seeped through their shoes, and mud clung to their skirts. But the rain was stopping, and the first hint of dawn touched the eastern sky. At the ferry pole, an old mule stood patient in the shallows. Its owner was nowhere to be seen, but the beast looked gentle and sure-footed. "Can you ride?" Mariah asked. "I think so." Mariah helped Eliza onto the mule's broad back. The animal accepted its burden without complaint and began picking its way toward solid ground. "Where did you learn all this?" Eliza asked as they moved through the pre-dawn mist. "The breathing, the roots, the herb knowledge. From watching, from listening, from asking questions when folks thought I was too young to understand the answers." "And the hymn? The one Josiah was singing?" "My mama taught it to me before she died. Said it was insurance." Mariah walked beside the mule, one hand on Eliza's ankle to keep her steady. Roots and safe houses and signals, all coded in a children's lullaby. She said someday I might need to know the true way home. "This isn't home, though." "No, ma'am, but it's safety. And sometimes that's the same thing." The Quimby farm sat quiet in the grey dawn light. Nathaniel Quimby met them at the kitchen door, his weathered face kind but worried. His wife Mercy appeared with dry clothes and hot tea, asking no questions that couldn't wait. "Bounty men came through an hour ago," Nathaniel said as they sat around the scrubbed pine table. "Wet as drowned cats and mad as hornets. Said something about a bridge giving way." "Is everyone all right?" Mariah asked. "No one hurt, but their papers are ruined and their horses scattered. They're holed up at the inn, trying to sort out what happened." Nathaniel poured more tea. Gives us time to think. Mercy examined the forged manumission papers, holding them close to the lamp. Her eyes were sharp, trained by years of reading legal documents for folks who couldn't read them for themselves. "This wax is wrong," she said, confirming what Mariah already knew. "Brown instead of red, and the consistency's off. Somebody made this recent." "How can you tell?" "True seal wax ages different. Gets harder, more brittle. This is still soft." She pressed a fingernail into the brown seal. It left a mark. "Made this week, I'd say." Eliza leaned forward. "Can you prove it?" "Maybe. If we can get to the clerk's office, compare this to a real seal." Mercy folded the papers, careful. "But that's dangerous. Bounty men are still in town." "What about the ledger page?" Mariah asked. "The one about the switched infant?" Nathaniel frowned. "That's heavier business. If there's proof of inheritance fraud, there is." Mariah described what she'd seen in Dr. Parrish's back room. The Latin entries, the margin notes about Silas Pike's double debt scheme, the porch blessing that could change everything. Mercy stitched the forged papers into a fresh pocket in Mariah's hymnal, her thread matching the quilt that covered their knees. "If they are right about this, it could free more than just you and your brother. It could expose a scheme that's been bleeding estates dry." "But we need proof," Eliza said. "Real proof that will stand up in court. Then we get it." Mariah stood and smoothed her damp skirts. "The public reading's been moved to dusk because of the flood. That gives us time to gather what we need." "And if the bounty men find us first?" Mariah touched the blue ribbon, now retied around her own wrist. "Then we trust that Providence brought us this far for a reason." Outside, the sun was rising clear and bright. The storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean and full of possibility. But the hardest part was still ahead. The courthouse stood empty in the morning light. Water still dripped from the eaves, and the posted notices hung sodden and unreadable. Mariah and Eliza approached careful, staying in the shadows of the surrounding buildings. "Office is locked," Eliza whispered. Mariah studied the door. Heavy oak with iron fittings, built to last. But the frame was old, and the wood had swelled from the rain. She pulled a piece of wire from her apron, something she'd learned from watching Aunt Dinah fix broken latches. "Keep watch." The lock was simpler than it looked. Mariah slipped the wire through the gap beside the doorframe and felt for the latch mechanism inside. A little pressure, a careful twist, and the lock clicked open. Inside, the probate office smelled of wet paper and lamp oil. Horace Bell's desk sat neat and orderly, with legal documents stacked precise and a box of sealing wax beside his inkwell. Mariah opened the wax box. Red seals, proper and true. She held one beside the forged papers. The difference was clear as day, rich red against muddy brown, sharp edges against blurred ones. "It's obvious when you see them together," Eliza said. "Yes, ma'am, but we need the clerk to witness it legal." Mariah pocketed a sample of the true red wax. "And we need the ledger page from Dr. Parrish." "How do we get that?" Before Mariah could answer, bells began ringing upriver. A wagon rattled into the square, its wheels grinding on the wet stones. Time was running short. Nathaniel Quimby's wagon was sturdy and unremarkable, the kind that could pass through town without drawing notice. Canvas stretched over bent wooden ribs, hiding its passengers from curious eyes. Mercy Quimby sat beside her husband on the driver's bench, her plain bonnet tied tight against the wind. She'd sewn Mariah's hymnal with fresh thread, hiding the forged papers so well the stitching looked original. "Federal riders came through at dawn," Nathaniel said as they rolled toward town. "Fugitive Slave Act enforcement. They're checking all the ferry crossings." Mariah felt her stomach tighten. More complications, more dangers to navigate. "What does that mean for us?" Eliza asked. "Means we move fast and quiet," Mercy replied. "Get the proof we need and make the case public before anyone can question the circumstances." The wagon jolted over a rough patch of road. Inside the canvas shelter, Mariah checked the blue ribbon on her wrist. It was holding firm, but the silk was beginning to fray. Like everything else, it had its limits. "Cross at dusk, not dark," Nathaniel said, echoing his earlier advice. "Too early and folks are busy with their own concerns. Too late and they're suspicious of strangers." The courthouse came into view, its white columns gleaming in the afternoon sun. A crowd was already gathering for the public reading, debt notices and bounty authorities and all the legal business that affected everyone's lives. Mariah took a deep breath. Time to see what Providence has in store. At the river landing, Josiah waited in the reeds. His clothes were still damp from the storm, but he'd found shelter in an old fishing shelter and managed to keep dry enough to avoid catching cold. The blue ribbon was gone, lost in the river when the bridge gave way. But he wasn't worried. Mariah would understand. Movement caught his eye. 2 men picking their way along the shore, looking for something. Caleb Rusk, Silas Pike's main partner, and one of the bounty men from last night, both soaked and angry. "Papers are ruined," the bounty man was saying. "Can't prove authority without proper documentation." "Pike's got copies back at the plantation," Caleb replied. "But those children are the key. Find them, and we can make this whole mess go away." Josiah sank deeper into the reeds. They were close enough that he could smell the river mud on their boots. A mule nosed through the marsh grass toward them. The same animal that had carried Eliza to safety, now wandering loose and looking for company. It approached Caleb with gentle curiosity. "Shoo," Caleb said, pushing at the mule's nose. "Get on." But the mule had spotted Josiah in the reeds. It moved toward the boy with the steady purpose of a creature that knew where it was going. Josiah held perfectly still, but the mule's presence was like a pointer arrow. Caleb's eyes followed the mule's gaze. "Well, well, what have we here?" Josiah broke from the reeds and ran. Behind him, the men shouted and gave chase, but the boy was quick and knew the ground. He led them in a wide circle, always staying just ahead, always keeping them focused on him instead of the town. At the old fishing dock, he grabbed a lantern from an abandoned boat. The wick was dry and the oil still good. He struck a light and held it high. The men saw the signal and assumed he was calling for help. They waded into the shallows, trying to cut off his escape route. But Josiah wasn't escaping. He was leading them exactly where he wanted them to go. The current was tricky near the old pilings, full of whirlpools and hidden snags. The bounty man stepped into a deep hole and went under, coming up sputtering and cursing. Caleb tried to help him and lost his footing too. By the time they sorted themselves out, Josiah was gone, but not far. He crouched behind a fallen log and watched as they staggered toward shore, their weapons soaked and their authority thoroughly undermined. The mule watched too, chewing thoughtfully on a clump of marsh grass. When the men were gone, it approached Josiah again and nuzzled his shoulder, gentle as a blessing. The courthouse square filled as afternoon faded toward evening. Word had spread about the morning's troubles. The bridge collapse, the bounty men's mishap, the questions about debt authority and estate inheritance. Mariah stood at the edge of the crowd, holding her hymnal tight. Inside its stitched margins lay the forged papers and the sample of true red wax, evidence that could change everything if she could present it right. Eliza was beside her, pale but determined. The fever had broken during the afternoon, but she still moved careful, like someone not quite steady on her feet. "There's Reverend Cole," Eliza said, nodding toward the courthouse steps. The preacher was setting up a lectern, his leather book already open to the right page. Horace Bell, the clerk, stood beside him with his seal and ink, ready to make whatever decisions official. But Silas Pike was there too, flanked by 2 men Mariah didn't recognize. Not the bounty hunters from last night. These looked more official, with clean clothes and legal papers that hadn't been soaked in river water. "Federal marshals," Eliza whispered. "Pike must have sent for them." Mariah felt the ground shifting under her feet. The morning's plan had been simple: present the evidence, expose the fraud, set things right. But now there were federal agents involved, and the stakes were higher than ever. "What do we do?" Before Mariah could answer, the crowd parted. Josiah limped through, his clothes muddy and his face streaked with dirt, but alive and whole. He carried a plain lantern in one hand and something else in the other. "Sis," he called, holding up a scrap of wet paper. "I found this by the bridge." Mariah looked at what he'd brought her, part of a ledger page, water-stained but readable, Latin words and cramped handwriting, documenting a birth blessing and inheritance complications from 18 years past. Page 214 from Dr. Parrish's ledger. The proof she needed, delivered by Providence and a 7-year-old boy who'd faced down armed men to retrieve it. The public reading was about to begin. Silas Pike stepped forward as the crowd settled. He held a leather portfolio and spoke with the confidence of a man used to being obeyed. "Evening, neighbors," he called. "Got some estate business to settle before we proceed with the debt matters." He opened his portfolio and pulled out a ring, gold with a distinctive seal. "This here proves inheritance rights to a different branch of the Mayhew family. Changes everything about the debt situation." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Reverend Cole frowned and consulted his book. "I have no record of any such heir." "Records can be incomplete," Silas said smooth. "This ring's been in the family for generations. Proves my client's claim predates any current debts." Mariah studied the ring from where she stood. Something about it nagged at her. The way the gold caught the light, the shape of the seal. Then she saw it. The ring matched a ribbon knot in Reverend Cole's book. Not a family heirloom, but a marker tied to a specific date and blessing. She'd seen the preacher use such knots to keep his place in important documents. "That ring belongs to the church," she called out, clear enough for all to hear. The crowd turned. Silas's face went hard. "Girl, you don't know what you're talking about." "I know church records." Mariah stepped forward, hymnal in hand. "And I know forgeries." She opened the book and pulled out the water-stained papers. "Mr. Pike made these manumission documents to sell me off the estate books. Used wrong-colored wax and crooked letter forms." Horace Bell took the papers and examined them by lamplight. His face was grave as he compared them to his own sealing supplies. "The wax is brown," he confirmed. "Should be red for legal documents. And the consistency's wrong. Too fresh for a document supposedly filed months ago." "More than that," Mariah said, pulling out the real wax sample. "Mr. Pike's been running a double debt scheme, making the estate look poorer than it is so the bounty men can seize extra property." She handed Reverend Cole the water-stained ledger page. "This is from Dr. Parrish's records. Shows the truth about the porch blessing and the inheritance complications." The preacher read the Latin carefully, his eyebrows rising. "This document's a switched infant blessing from 18 years past. Legal and properly recorded." Eliza stepped forward, her voice steady despite the fever weakness. "What does that mean?" "Means your inheritance is legitimate and uncomplicated," Reverend Cole said gentle. "And the debt figures Pike presented are false." Silas tried to interrupt. "You can't prove—" "We can." Mariah fitted the ring to the ribbon knot in the preacher's book. It matched perfect, proving the ring was a bookmark, not a family heirloom. "That's your ring, Reverend. Used to mark the porch blessing page." The federal marshals exchanged glances. One of them stepped forward. "Miss Pike, these are serious allegations of fraud." "They're lies," Silas said, but his voice had lost its certainty. "Told by people with reason to lie." "Then you won't object to a full audit of the estate records?" Silas's face went pale. Around him the crowd was murmuring, not with amusement now, but with anger. Fraud and forgery affected everyone's property rights and legal protections. The clerk warmed his red sealing wax over a small flame. "Names then, let's get this settled proper." Eliza signed the papers with a hand that barely shook. Her inheritance was confirmed clean, the debts reduced to their true amounts, and the bounty lien voided for cause. Then she turned to the clerk and spoke clear enough for all to hear. "I want to manumit Mariah and Josiah, full freedom papers, properly witnessed and sealed." The clerk nodded and prepared fresh documents, but before he could begin writing, Eliza faced the crowd and spoke again. "This morning I laughed and said a child's help was too black for me." Her voice broke slightly, but she continued. "Then he," she laid her hand on Josiah's head, "faced the bounty hungers and saved me. Both of them did. Saved my inheritance, my reputation, maybe my life." She looked at Mariah. "I was wrong. Help comes in all colors and wisdom doesn't wait for age. These children showed more courage and sense than I did." The clerk wrote careful, documenting the manumission with proper legal language. When he was finished, he pressed the true red seal into the warm wax. Mariah pulled the blue ribbon from her wrist, frayed now, but still holding. She threaded it through the fresh seal and held the document up to the fading light. Around them, the crowd began to hum. The old lullaby, the one with verses that marked safe crossings and true routes home. But they sang it not as flight music, but as freedom held in community witness. The federal marshals led Silas Pike away. The bounty men collected their gear and departed. Dr. Parrish arrived to confirm the ledger entries. Everything was legal, everything was proper, everything was right. As night gathered and the lanterns were lowered, hope held firm in the courthouse square. 3 weeks later, Mariah sat on the porch of the Quimby farmhouse, teaching Eliza the true verses of the old lullaby. Not the root songs for running away, but the return verses for coming home. Josiah played in the yard with the children from neighboring farms, free children now with papers that proved it. His new blue ribbon caught the evening light as he ran. The harvest was nearly in. The Mayhew estate was running proper under Eliza's management, with fair wages and honest accounting. Some of the enslaved families had chosen to stay on as free workers. Others had moved on to new places and fresh starts. Inside the farmhouse, Aunt Dinah prepared supper, while Reverend Cole copied hymns into a new songbook, verses of freedom and homecoming instead of flight and fear. "Will you stay?" Eliza asked as they watched the sun set over the fields. Mariah considered the question. The Quimbys had offered them a permanent place with schooling and opportunity and all the safety they could want. But home was a complicated thing. For now, she said, until we decide where home really is. And how will you know? Mariah smiled and touched the blue ribbon that now marked her place in the songbook. When the singing calls us there, instead of calling us away. The lantern was lowered. The seal glowed red. The blue ribbon fluttered once, then stilled. In the end, wisdom wore colors they never expected, and courage came dressed as children with perfect pitch and steady hearts.